Mr. President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
I would say that, first of all, whether or not that's good policy, I think you have to have the accurate input before you make a policy determination. The oil and gas industry is very complicated. In order for them to go out and risk their capital, they have to plow this money back in. Quite frankly, most of it is plowed back into exploration. What I wanted to get across that I think is important. The Sanders Amendment repeals three things. First of all, expensing for intangible drilling costs, that's IDC, intangible drilling costs, repeals the percentage depletion for marginal oil and gas wells, and repeals the manufacturing deduction for oil and gas. Now, I predict that a long time ago that when the Gulf spill took place, people were going to try to parlay this into something to punish oil and gas. This is what they've been trying to do for a long time. It could very well be tonight when the president makes his big speech, he's going to talk about now we're going to have to look at cap and trade, as if there's some relationship between what happened in the Gulf and cap and trade. Now, repealing expensing of intangible drilling costs eliminates the ability to expense intangible drilling and development costs, which would force at least 25 to 30% reduction in drilling budgets, leading to lost jobs, lost production, and higher prices to consumer. On the floor of the Senate yesterday, I spent some time talking about in the state of Louisiana how many jobs actually would be lost. But the IDC is an expensing out item that has been in our tax code since 1913. And it really only applies to the smaller operators, so they're the ones that are singled out for oil and gas production. Now, likewise, since 1926, small producers and millions of royalty owners have had the option of utilizing percentage depletion to both simplify and account for the decline in the value of minerals. As you know, they do deplete as you produce minerals. Now, who's going to be paying the most for this? I'm going to share with you who is. But for right now, I'll yield the floor and reserve the balance of my time.
Mr. President.
Senator from Vermont.
Let me just say to my friend from Oklahoma, who talked about the oil companies plowing back their money into new wells, that the big five oil companies spent $270 billion over the past decade buying back their own stock, about $100 billion more than they spent on oil exploration. My friend from Oklahoma talks about jobs, and that is obviously an important issue. And I would concede that there may be some job loss here, but it is matched by an investment in sustainable energy that would create far, far more employment than the relatively small number of jobs that might be lost. I would quote from, or mention Dr. Kruger, the chief economist at the Treasury Department. He has estimated that repealing these tax breaks would lead to a decline in employment in oil and gas production of less than 0.5% at most. And that translates into the potential loss of 1,650 jobs in the oil and gas industry. I do not mean to minimize that. One job loss is one job too many. But on the other hand, in this bill, we put $10 billion into the Energy and Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program, where the estimate is we can create 140,000 jobs over the same period of time. So on one hand, we might lose 1,600 jobs. On the other hand, we gain 140,000 jobs. And with that, I would reserve the balance of my time.
Mr. President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Let me mention one thing I want to make sure I get in here before we run out of time. We went through this class warfare once back in 1980. We had Jimmy Carter as President of the United States, and he had the windfall profits tax. I'm sure my friend from Vermont remembers that at that time. I remember it well, and that's when they were going to have a windfall profit tax on oil and gas industry. And the results of that, and I'll quote right now, it says the WPT reduced domestic production between 3 and 6% and increased oil imports from 8 to 16%. This made the United States more dependent upon imported oil. That's the Congressional Research Service, which is nonpartisan. So that is a major issue here in terms of our dependency on other countries for our ability to run this machine called America. Now let's get back to the percentage depletion. The percentage depletion is particularly important for the production of America's over 600,000 low-volume marginal wells. The average marginal well produces 2 barrels a day. Now, let me tell you what a marginal well is, just so people, my colleagues, when they get ready to vote on this, will realize who they're affecting. A marginal well is a well that produces under 15 barrels a day. The average of the producing marginal wells today is 2 barrels a day. 2 barrels a day. Now, my friend is talking about all these big giants. I'm not nearly as concerned about the big five and the majors as I am my marginal operators in my state of Oklahoma. So with an average of 2 barrels a day, and we, the marginal producers, actually account for 28% of all domestic production in the lower 48 states. 28%. And these are all small people. Now, if you're concerned also about who you're affecting with this legislation, look at the royalty owners. There are literally millions of royalty owners. These owners have maybe a small piece of property. It might be their homestead. They're the ones who are paying or would be denied the use of their land. So by putting the small ones out of business, they're the ones that you are damaging. I'll reserve the balance of my time.
Mr. President, how much time does Mr. Inhofe?
Senator from Vermont. Senator from Oklahoma has 1.5 minutes. And Senator from Vermont, 3 minutes.
3 minutes, 1.5 minutes?
Yeah.
Mr. President, what we are talking about now is beginning to address the deficit issue in a significant way. $25 billion over a 10-year period is a good start. And I think we cannot continue to have people coming down to the floor of the Senate and saying, oh, think about the legacy we're leaving our children and our grandchildren. And then when it really comes to the point of doing something, of saying to ExxonMobil, who made $19 billion in profits last year and got a $156,000 refund from the IRS, you can't have it both ways. This is a time to stand up and do the right thing. But again, it is not just ExxonMobil. It is Chevron, who received a $19 million refund from the IRS. It is Valero Energy, the 25th largest company in America, with $68 billion in sales last year, received a $157 million refund check. So what we have the opportunity to do now is to, in fact, address the deficit crisis, $25 billion over a 10-year period, create over 100,000 new jobs over that period as we move into energy efficiency and sustainable energy. And with that, I would reserve the balance of my time.
Mr. President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Mr. President, let me just correct this again. I had already stated that the statement that my good friend from Vermont made was a false statement. Inadvertently, I might add, in terms of Exxon and what they have paid, and I commented that they paid more than $18 billion in the years between 2004 and 2008. Then he returned and said that, well, 2009 is when they have not paid any. They have already paid $500 million in 2009 in U.S. federal income tax, and they won't know the final liability until they file a return later this year. So they're still doing it. The information that my good friend has is false. Now, getting back to the bill and who this really affects, it doesn't affect Exxon. It doesn't affect the BP and all these giant companies. It's the small producers that will be driven out of business without being able to do the deduction of the expenses on manufacturing. If he has this bill and this bill passes, this is going to single out the oil and gas industry as the only industry that does not enjoy the same deductions. And they're punitive to this industry because right now it's quite obvious that they're trying to exploit the tragedy in the Gulf. Let me just say this one thing, because today in our debate, my good friend from, it's my understanding I have a minute and a half left. Is that correct?
The senator's time has expired.
Well, it can't be expired. I'm timing it.
The senator had a minute and a half when he started this segment.
Since you have the last say, could I have 30 seconds just to finish? Yeah, and I was going to respond to your comment about the deficits, and we ought to be concerned. I am concerned about the deficit. What's interesting about this debate, I'm ranked by the National Journal as the most conservative member of the United States Senate. I suggest my proud liberal friend from Vermont's probably in the other end of the spectrum. And if you look at who's responsible for deficit spending, I think that you'd find that you would be more responsible than I would. Thank you for an additional 30 minutes.
30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Let's not overdo it here. To my
Senator from
friend,
Vermont.
yes, I am not a liberal but a progressive. Sometime we'll talk about the difference. I did not vote for the $3 trillion war in Iraq. I did not vote for hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks. I did not vote for a Medicare Part D program, which drove up the deficit altogether. As a matter of fact, I suspect my friend may have voted the other way on all of those issues which were not paid for. In terms of ExxonMobil, let's be clear. I don't know what ExxonMobil told you, but I would ask unanimous consent to submit for the record what ExxonMobil told the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. And what is reported by the SEC for 2009, I would say to my friend from Oklahoma, is they received a $156 million refund. That's the SEC. I would ask unanimous consent to submit that to the record.
Without objection.
Gentleman yield for a question.
Well, let me finish my remarks. I mean, I did yield. This is where we are. Where we are right now is the moment to either, go forward or not, be serious or not. We hear day after day about concerns about the deficit. What we know is that the oil industry year after year has been enormously profitable. We know that in 2009, a number of oil companies, including Exxon,
Senator's time has expired.
did not pay any taxes. Let's do something about it. Let's pass this amendment. Thank you.